Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This is part 1 in a 2-part series where I'm explaining how to read guitar tab. So in this lesson and another lesson, I'm going to explain how to read guitar tab. And in this first lesson, I'm going to explain the basics of guitar tab as far as how to read the diagram and what the numbers represent and some other things. In the next lesson, I'll go over more notation that you'll see as far as things like bends or trills or hammer-ons and pull-offs and how to read those. And tab stands for tablature, and there's tablature for more than just guitar, but in this lesson we're just going to focus on guitar tab. And guitar tab is a widely used form of music notation. If you play guitar, you'll run across it all the time. It's really important to learn. It's not as in-depth as standard notation. It's incomplete compared to standard notation, but since you'll run across it so often, it's important to at least understand what's going on. And if you'd like to learn standard notation, you can check out our series, How to Read Music for Guitar. It's just a free series on YouTube, and it'll really get you started on how to read standard notation. So first thing I want to go over is the grid for tab. And it looks similar to standard notation where you have these horizontal lines and you have these vertical lines. The horizontal lines don't represent the same thing as standard notation. The vertical lines do. The horizontal lines actually represent your guitar strings. In standard notation, the horizontal lines have nothing to do with your guitar strings. These vertical lines represent bar lines, which just break up music into bars or measures, which I'm not going to really dive into in this lesson, but if you want to learn more about that, you can check out our How to Read Music for Guitar series. But just know it's a way to make it easier to read music and easier to count music. So like I said, these horizontal lines represent your guitar strings, and this line down at the bottom represents your 6th string. This line at the top represents your 1st string, which obviously means that this is your 5th, this is your 4th, this is your 3rd, and this is your 2nd string. And if you've never looked at charts or diagrams like this or tab before, it may be confusing that the 6th string is right here. A lot of people would think that the 6th string was up here, but it's the opposite. Any horizontal chart that you see, any chart representing a guitar fretboard, is going to be laid out this way if it's laid out properly. And that's with your 6th string at the bottom and your 1st string at the top. And basically it's representing like if you were looking down at your guitar when you're holding it. But it can be confusing because going this direction would be going up towards the ceiling and going this direction would be going down towards the floor, but you just have to get used to that. So when you look at guitar tab, when you see numbers, those actually represent where to place your finger on the fretboard. So for example, if you see a 2 right here, that's on this line which represents your 3rd string. That means you're going to play and fret the note on the 3rd string 2nd fret, which on your guitar in standard tuning is an A note. And of course, if you're looking at this diagram, it's laid out the same where this is your 6th string, this is your 1st string, and these are your fret wires, which in between represent your frets. So it's really that simple. The numbers represent where to fret a note, and the number will be on what string to fret that note. So if you look at this first one right here is telling you to play the 6th string, and when you see a 0, that means you're not fretting any note. You're just going to play that string open, meaning you're just going to strike it without fretting it anywhere on the fretboard. So in standard tuning, if you're playing that would be your low E string, so you'd be playing an E note. Right here, that's telling you to fret the note on the 3rd string, 1st fret. This is fretting the note in the 2nd fret on the 3rd string. This is fretting the note on the 3rd fret on the 2nd string, 2nd fret, 2nd string, and so on. It's pretty self-explanatory once you get that simple concept down. Just always know that the numbers are going to be right on the string that they represent. So this is on your 6th string, these are on your 3rd string, and so on. And just know that anytime you see a 0, that means to strike the string open. And the numbers, when they're spread out like this horizontally and not stacked on top of each other, mean to play them individually. So you're going to play them as single notes. You're not going to play any of these notes together like you would when you're playing a chord or anything. And in the next lesson, I'll show you what a chord would actually look like in tab when you actually stack the numbers on top of each other. So tab's really simple once you get that concept down, but it's really incomplete. So you could look at this and you could play these notes, but you would have no idea what the piece actually really sounded like, because the way you play these notes, the rhythm, the timing, all that isn't shown on tab. That's shown in standard notation. With standard notation, it gives you all the information you need. But with tab, you have to know what it sounds like. the actual piece or the song or the lick that you're learning, or you have to listen to that in conjunction with trying to learn it on tab. Tab is showing you where to put your fingers and where the notes land on your fretboard, but it's not giving you much else. And a lot of times you're going to see tab right below standard notation. So it's actually really beneficial if you learn the basics of standard notation, because then you can use that at the same time with tab and it'll fill in all the gaps that you need. So you wouldn't have to be a fast sight reader as far as understanding, well, that's an E note on my low string, that's a G note, that's an A note, or any of that. You could use tab for that because that's telling you exactly where your fingers go on your fretboard. But understanding the basic note values and rhythm will allow you to fill in all the gaps that tab's not giving you. Also, it's going to show you in standard notation rest, which tab doesn't give you. These are rests as well. Those aren't marked on tab. And it's going to tell you a time signature, which is really important, and a key signature, which will really help out. This isn't so important because if you're playing guitar tab, you already know it's in this clef, which is a treble clef. Like I said, if you don't know any of this, what I'm talking about, check out our series, How to Read Music for Guitar, and I explain all of that. So I definitely think it's beneficial, even if you don't want to learn how to read music really well, standard notation, to just learn the basics of it, and then you can use tab along with it, and like I said, the standard notation will fill in all the gaps that tab's not giving you. Another way you might see tab are with these vertical lines like this, and those are actually representing note values. For example, these longer lines are representing quarter notes, this shorter line's representing a half note, this is representing 2/8 notes, this is representing 4/16 notes, this is representing an eighth note by itself. And if you understand note values, seeing them is pretty easy to line up, especially the 16th and 8th notes, because they have flags or beams. The lines, when you're just looking at different length lines, is a little tricky. You have to really focus in and figure that out. But like I said, if you can just learn basic note values, then you could look at this and actually get the basic rhythm down. You're still missing rests, so that can be pretty tricky. But at least if you could hear the piece along with this or the song, it'll be a lot easier to figure out if you understand basic note values. So another way you may see tab written out is like this. This is a really simplified version, and a lot of times it's written just because it's written on a Word document or something where you have these dash lines and stuff. But you will run across this sometimes, so it's important to understand what's going on. So what I showed before is a really nice way to write tab. It makes it really easy to read. It shows you bar lines, and it is a lot closer to standard notation. But this, like I said, you could write on a Word document or something. A lot of times that's what's going on while you'll actually see it this way. But these dotted lines are just the exact same thing as we were going over before. They just represent your strings. A lot of times you'll actually see the string numbers written out. So 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 obviously represent your strings. When it's written like this, you're not usually going to see any type of bar line breaking these up into bars. It's just really basic. And then again, you're just going to see numbers written on these lines which represent your strings. So if you see a 0 on the 6th string, that means to play your 6th string open. If you saw a 1 on your 5th string, that means to play the note on the 1st fret, and so on. Another thing that you might see is something like this in front of a number, and that represents hammering on, or you might see a P for pull off. And I'm not going to dive into that in this lesson. I'm going to dive into the better way to write that notation in the next lesson, but I just want you to be aware of what that would actually mean if you saw something like an H or a P. And there's other lessons on YouTube that really dive into the more simplified tab notation, so you can check those out, and that'll give you the answers for any of that. But in these lessons, I'm really focusing on tab like I showed you earlier in this lesson. So that's the basics of reading tab. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson where I'm going to show you different notation that you'll find on tab, such as bends and trills and slides. It'll be really useful to you if you want to learn more about tab. And be sure to subscribe to our channel because we add at least one new lesson every day.